Hello friends, I'm Jim Hale with you today to follow up on a story that we have been updating regularly concerning the Carmelite monastery of Philadelphia. As we just reported, and as you can see in the link below, there has been a major development. Two sisters from the St. Joseph's Association, along with their attorney and a locksmith, showed up at the monastery unannounced on the day before Thanksgiving to change the locks on the chapel door and the cloister itself. Now, this is the entity, St. Joseph's Association, which carries out the Vatican's new regulations for monasteries. And as you probably know, those regulations, known as Cor Orans, resulted in the departure of 9 traditional sisters in April of last year. Now, a dispute has developed over who actually controls the property, to say the least. And to get some facts about this story, I am pleased to welcome Mr. Brody Hale. Mr. Hale is a former board member of the monastery and an attorney who has spent a lot of time studying this issue and working with us to help us understand. Brody Hale, welcome to LifeSiteNews, sir.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to sort of clarify at the outset that the board that I was a member of was the board prior to September 2nd of this year.
Okay.
That Mother Pia of Jesus Crucified had initially set up in 2021 in conjunction with her goal to transfer the monastery into the hands of Catholics who would maintain it as a Catholic sacred space, her goal at that time. So that was the board that I was a part of, as I say, between sometime at the very beginning of this year and September 2nd of this year when I resigned. I was not a part of the monastery board itself. And yes, I am an attorney in private practice, but I've not had any involvement as an attorney in this matter. My involvement here has strictly been as a Catholic layperson who cares about this issue. Obviously I have my legal training. I just wanted to clarify that at the outset.
Well, it's a good thing that you have a legal mind, because this story is really complex. I mean, I've been following it now for a couple of years, and it's hard to understand. So I guess my first question to you, Brody, is who owns this building?
That's a very good question, and you're right. This has been one of the most complex matters I've ever come across, both on account of the legal postures of all sides and of the personalities involved. The answer to your question, Jim, is at this time I can't conclusively tell you whose name is on the deed of the monastery, because I haven't been at all aware of what's transpired since September 2nd of this year. At that time, the monastery property was titled to a specific corporation that had been created at the beginning of the 20th century to hold the monastery property. And throughout the course of the monastery's history, the members of that corporation had been the entirety of the membership of the monastery itself, so all the women religious who had been resident within the monastery, and whomever the Archbishop of Philadelphia at any given time had been, Nelson Perez being the present Archbishop of the city. So as of September 2nd of this year, given that after their resignation from the monastery corporate board, after the Valparaiso Carmelites who resigned, who left the monastery after they left, they resigned from the board. When I departed this situation on September 2nd, the membership of the board consisted of Archbishop Perez and Mother Pia of Jesus Crucified, the last sister who had been resident in the monastery. What has happened between then and now in terms of what they have both done, or one of them has done, or both of them have done in concert, or what has been done with the property, I can't say. It's certainly interesting that the St. Joseph Association seems to be, if you will, in possession of the premises at the moment. I'm not using possession in its legal context, merely in the context of who sort of has seeming control over the property based on what you're reporting. But in terms of whose name the deed is actually in at present, it's anyone's guess, unless someone is in the know and can actually answer the question, which I am not.
So, Brody, let's talk about this property, because I know that you are passionate about preserving sacred spaces, and
Yes.
this is truly a crown jewel of the Roman Catholic faith. What a gorgeous building. I was just there a few days ago, and it's in great shape. So why is there even any discussion at all about either selling this property or demolishing it? Like, I just can't understand it. And I think a lot of people are really struggling to know, why is there not more concern to preserve this beautiful place and actually turn it into a monastery again?
Whether or not it's a monastery, for better or worse, in the sense that it has cloistered religious residing within it, is a decision that is up to any archbishop or any bishop. Monasteries of women religious or men religious, exist, unfortunately, in the times in which we live, I might say, and at the pleasure of whomever is the ordinary of the diocese, the head of the diocese in which they're located. I'm not saying this is a great thing. Obviously, we've seen in recent weeks and months and years, with Cor Orans especially, how the present state of things is not so great for these communities. But as to whether Carmelites in communion with the Holy See can reside there, that's up to Archbishop Perez to a very large degree. Why, it can't be a sacred space, why it can't be used by Catholics, even if it isn't able to be used as a monastery, you're going to have to ask the Archdiocese and the St. Joseph Association that question. A plan had been developed that would have allowed the monastery to have been used as a place of prayer for various Catholic-related programs, etc. And it would have been basically paying for itself perpetually. That whole plan had been put together, etc., and then was torpedoed over the summer. Is the best way I can put it.
Well, for the record, I just want to say that LifeSiteNews has contacted both the St. Joseph's Association and the Archdiocese, and we haven't heard anything back from them. Brody, what do you think is going on here?
Again, great question. I have no way to know what the sisters are presently doing. All I can say is that when I left, the monastery had been valued at about $600,000, give or take. The monastery, prior to its dissolution, had a portfolio of investments of about $5.2 million that was producing a very sustainable rate of return that would have satisfied any needs of the property. As I say, unless something drastic happened, pretty much perpetually. Is this a money grab by someone? That's a question that continues to occupy my mind. Is someone ideologically opposed to the continued existence of this monastery? I mean, even when I say existence of the monastery, I mean literally its continued standing as a structure, as a Catholic sacred space. Also a great question. We've seen a lot of monasteries lost in recent years, sold off by the orders that own them. The secrecy that has surrounded this process, even when I was involved, I thought was a bit extreme. Certainly, I think it's even more extreme now, considering the fact that everybody, who is able to understand what is happening is well aware of the fact that the locks were changed, etc. It's not a secret. So, clarity would be helpful, but, there are a lot of questions as to what's happening here.
Brody, why did you resign?
So I think that requires a little bit of background. As I had mentioned, I had been asked by Mother Pia of Jesus Crucified during the summer of 2021 to work with her and others on putting together a plan that would have allowed the monastery to remain as a Catholic sacred space. the chapel intact, the monastery cloister intact, etc. Whether or not there were Carmelites in residence. That plan had been evolving. It had moved forward, throughout the end of last year, the beginning of this year. Mother Pia then departed to Lake Elmo at her own, request. She chose voluntarily to go. She had been assured that the monastery, if it were suppressed by Rome, that Article 72 of Cor Orans, which would allow the goods and obligations of the monastery to move with the remaining sister or sisters that were left, would be used to undertake the suppression. So in that case, Mother Pia and Lake Elmo would have made the call on what would have happened to the property. Very shortly after Mother Pia departed Philadelphia to Lake Elmo, Article 73 of Cor Orans, which would be used in the case of an abandoned monastery, was invoked to suppress the Philadelphia Carmel. That disturbed me. Throughout the rest of the spring and summer, various discussions were had between myself and other lay folks that Mother Pia had asked to work with her, with the St. Joseph Association. Even up until June of this year, I believed that we had a very solid foundation upon which the Mother Pia's initial plan would be able to be implemented based on those discussions. The association and its leadership Sister Mary Elizabeth Gokul and Sister Gabriella Hicks had stated to me and others that they had no designs on the property, that they thought our plan was a good one, etc. It seemed like we would be able to negotiate that plan into being. I'm giving you the very short version. That all changed toward the end of June into July. As the summer, high summer came upon us, it became very clear that what I thought was going to be possible was going to be more difficult at best. If we fast forward to the beginning of September, Mother Pia, who we'd been having discussions with very frequently, had indicated to me on the evening of the 2nd, which was a Friday, that she no longer wanted to fight to retain the monastery property. And she had asked me and others to, basically help her, orchestrate, a handover, etc., of the property. And in good conscience, I informed her, my exact words were, Mother Pia, I love you very much, but I cannot in good conscience go along with that. Considering the totality of the events which had transpired from her leaving to the 2nd of September, how shall I be charitable, or at least legally safe? The fact that various things which were stated were clearly not done, or were done in the opposite manner in which they had been stated. I could not in good conscience go along with simply forfeiting what I felt was a civilly strong point. And by the way, nothing of any of this had been put into the press at that point at Mother Pia's request. She wanted this to be very much kept out of the press. And I had respected that up to that point, but I could not any longer in good conscience go along with the sacking of this monastery. How else shall I put it? Whether canon law, in whatever sort of permutation the powers that be wanted to consider it, allowed for said sacking or not, it is repugnant to the conscience and should shock the conscience of all Catholics if one looks at the totality of what transpired from the beginning of these proceedings to that date. Over the course of that weekend, on the 4th of September, which was a Sunday, I had been asked if I wanted to become involved again in the proceedings, as apparently Mother had changed her mind again and wished to fight, but I had made a comment that in that case I would have to cancel some work that I had been doing over the weekend with the press to expose some of what was going on. And at that point, I was basically, told that, all communication with me ceased. I was told that I would get a call back later that day, and it never came. So it was clear to me that I had crossed someone and my presence was no longer wanted, which is it is what it is.
Right.
But I had nothing really to contribute until it really became clear to me that this process had rounded a bend with the present state of things, and there really I have no reason at this point to keep silent. I'm not under any legal obligation to do so, and I think the totality of what's transpired needs to be known by all Catholics, and especially all religious communities that may be facing this sort of travesty going forward. And that is what it is. There's no other way I can put it.
Well, Brody, what is it that you want these other religious communities, and you are sounding a warning right now, and what is that warning that you are telling us about?
The warning that I would pass on to any other religious looking at this is this. There were various things that were stated that would be done throughout this process, which weren't done. And by virtue of them being not done in the way that was initially said, the assets of this monastery moved, out of a path that they had initially been put on, and toward, a path of uncertainty, potential liquidation, who knows what. When someone states from day one that a particular provision of Port Oron 72 would be able to be used to dissolve a monastery, let's leave aside for the moment whether it should have been dissolved. I would argue that there was no reason to dissolve the Philadelphia Carmelite monastery to begin with. I think whatever difficulties had arisen in Philadelphia in 2021, a bit more pastoral approach could have probably been worked through. But when that didn't happen, when it was clear that the solution would be likely, Mother Pia was in residence, and she had been assured that if she moved, it wouldn't impact the dissolution of the monastery, or the suppression, I should say, of the Philadelphia Carmel. She was, in fact, her. I don't know if I have this document, but it was said many times that her incorporation into the Lake Elmo community was only supposed to occur one day after the dissolution or the suppression of the Philadelphia monastery, to make it, I believe it was written out in her, whatever you call the transfer documents, so that it would be very clear that at the time that she transferred, the monastery would not be abandoned, and that no one could pull, the usage of Article 73. In spite of all of that planning, it was indeed Article 73 of Port Orons that was used to suppress the monastery. Yeah. Why would anyone do this? There's no reason based in goodwill for this to be done. There's no reason based in, from what I can gather, any provision of truth or justice that would have had, such a flagrant changing of tactics done. The only result of which is that rather than Mother Pia having been able to make decisions canonically about where the monastery assets would go, it would be up to the St. Joseph Association to make those decisions. Was it they who wished to do this? I have no idea. Was it the Archdiocese? I have no idea. Was it the congregation or dicastery, whatever it's called now after the reforms of the Curia for religious that made this decision? I don't know. But I think it's about time, that LifeSite and any Catholic of goodwill start really drilling in to what all happened here and who the players were that were involved. Because until that happens, and until this sort of thing stops, any community that is subject to, an order of dissolution or what have you, runs the risk of something similar happening to it. And, there were various other aspects of this civilly with regard to how the monastery was incorporated that I think would have given Mother Pia, regardless of canon law, a lot of interesting options in terms of forcing some answers to be produced, and, making, it easier to perhaps, carry out what she wished to do. That, she, I assume, based on what I'm seeing with the locksmith, etc., chose not to avail herself of. But I would say to religious communities, start looking at what your, not only your canonical documents are, but what your civil documents are, who actually has title to the property that you inhabit, who, who has title, how many hands the title is in, whether it's in the community's hands, whether it's jointly within the, whether the archbishop or a bishop of a diocese sits ex officio on your board. Start to think civilly as well as canonically here. I have no choice but to say this, given what I've seen of the canon law system in this case. Because if Rome is not prepared to enforce its own laws in these matters, it's time for religious communities in this country, in my opinion, to avail themselves of whatever civil protections under American law they have, in order that their assets are not the assets, might I add, that lay folks and others have donated for the use of these communities are not frittered off for other purposes.
Yeah, and Brody, the tragedy of this is that just, a year and a half ago, this monastery was thriving with these traditional sisters who had come from Elysburg, Pennsylvania, and Valparaiso, Nebraska. They had to leave because, as they said, they weren't made to feel welcome with their traditional way of life anymore, with the Latin Mass. So they were in opposition to Cor Orans with the way they wanted to live. But it just seems like to me that the Archdiocese and this St. Joseph's Association, basically the message they're sending out is this, is that, we would rather suppress a monastery, demolish a monastery, than to have traditional sisters in a monastery. I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, it seems like that is the message that's being sent. I mean, how else is one supposed to read what's gone down?
That is just.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
What a sad commentary on the
pathetically sad
today.
Pathetically sad. And I say to His Holiness in Rome and all of the others in Rome, look at the church around the world, but let's just even look at the United States for the moment. Are traditional Catholics perfect people? No. Is traditional Catholicism free from problems? No. This world is not free from problems. We're not in heaven. This is planet Earth that we're on. But if you look at what is growing, what is thriving, what is not, it's fairly clear right now to see which communities, which sort of types of communities are growing and which aren't. As we see, continued attrition in mass attendance in, various parishes that are not traditional, and growth in others which are. But I leave all of that aside for a moment and simply, say, look, the bigger problem that I, even see beyond that right now is simply how shall I say, the seeming desire to asset strip, using a corporate term.
Yep.
Right now on the part of many leaders of this church. We'll cash in a monastery, as I have often said, as if it's a poker chip in Vegas, to get some money for whatever other initiative we wish to do, or this or that, or what have you. You can't build these places again. I mean, you can, but it would be cost prohibitive, and you'd have to probably train various craftspeople to do it. This was a very well-maintained structure. It had an endowment. It wasn't going to, basically you could simply sit there and let it, continue to exist forever, and no one would have had to have raised a penny to continue to do that. It's most problematic to look at what is happening. And I take no pleasure in saying this.
Yep.
I am the president of an organization called the St. Stephen Protomartyr Project. I work with Catholics generally to avert the loss of former parish churches that are targeted for closure, to allow them to continue to exist as chapels or shrines or oratories. There are bishops in this country and dioceses in this country that I'm pleased to say I've been able to work out agreements with in this regard, others that I have not. So I take no pleasure in saying all of this today, but I have to be honest.
Well,
I have to be very honest.
Well, Brody Hale, thank you very much. I guess I should say that you and I are not related, although I feel like you're my brother. Just being up there at that monastery, it's just easy to fall in love with the place, even when there's no sisters there, even when the chapel is closed. It's like, gosh, if you're a Catholic and you don't love buildings like this, then you don't have a pulse.
Agreed. Yeah.
So Brody,
Agreed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for all the work that you've done, for the service that you've provided to the sisters, and the work that you continue to do with your organization to save these sacred spaces, sir. So thank you so much for being with us today, and God bless you, sir.
Thank you, and God bless you.